jungle.
You fought off the pack of the promise of safety.
Uglu Khan and the Jet Mongols are our only chance.
The intricacies of the game.
You are about to become.
Aljai.
Want me to join you?
Can oğlum biz senge o'xshagan yo'l bor.
Taxtdan iboradadigan va'daga
Newly appointed leader without the sense to lead.
Ulus conquest and alias.
For you when it is safe. Jasur, I didn't expect to see you here.
Now they dine.
And for bringing us a few words.
Position. We must all go on.
Integrity of his rule by ignoring the ambitions of others. Consider my debt repaid.
Dark clouds suffocated the horizon, bleeding red over the shattered remnants of a once grand city. Smoke curled in twisted spirals above crumbling towers, whispering tales of betrayal and power lost. Amid the chaos, a lone figure moved with deliberate purpose, eyes like molten steel, muscles coiled for action. Every step echoed through empty streets, a rhythm of both vengeance and inevitability. He paused at the edge of the ruined plaza, sensing eyes watching, but seeing nothing. Silence. Then a faint shimmer in the shadows caught his attention, a presence he knew all too well, one he'd thought vanished forever. Something was coming, something unstoppable. Footsteps behind him. Soft, calculated. His hand brushed the hilt of a weapon, instincts screaming. Memories of blood-soaked nights flashed across his mind, of alliances torn and promises broken. The city had changed, yet some things remained. Fear, power, and the gnawing need for control. He stepped forward, feeling the pulse of the ruins beneath his boots, the air thick with unspoken threats. Somewhere above, crows scattered in panic. Sensing the storm of human ambition about to erupt once more, he remembered the words of the old seer. The conqueror rises not from victory, but from ruin. And ruin had come in spades. Families gone, leaders slain, hope extinguished. Yet within him, a different fire burned, one forged in desperation and sharpened by betrayal. A whisper of a plan, fragile but lethal, formed in the corners of his mind. He would reclaim what was stolen, but not just for survival, for dominance. And in that dominance, he'd uncover a truth the world wasn't ready to face. A shadow detached from the darkness, gliding with unnatural grace. He felt it before he saw it, a heartbeat too deliberate, a presence that shouldn't exist. His pulse quickened, awareness heightening, every nerve screaming caution. The figure emerged, and with it, questions that demanded answers. Friend or foe? Ally or assassin? And more unsettling, why here? Why now, after all these years? Time had twisted motives, and trust had become a currency more precious than gold. The wind carried a scent of iron and smoke, tugging at memories he tried to bury. Faces of the past flickered across his vision. Loved ones lost, rivals conquered, enemies who had vanished into legend. Yet one face refused to fade, etched deep into his mind like a scar. The one who had betrayed him when he was most vulnerable. That betrayal had defined him, shaped him, and now, as the air thickened with tension, he realized the reckoning was near. No escape, no mercy. Only the rise of what he was always meant to become. In the distance, a tower remained, defiantly intact amidst the ruin. A symbol, or perhaps a trap. He knew that reaching it meant answering questions that had haunted him for decades. Every step toward it was measured, deliberate, like chess pieces moving across a war-torn board. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first move in a game of shadows and blood. And above all, an unspoken certainty. Nothing would ever be the same again. He clenched his fists, feeling the call of destiny pressing against his ribs. The streets whispered threats and promises, history demanding its due. The figure in the shadows advanced silently, a mirror to his own deadly intent. Somewhere in the void, a bell tolled, not for warning but for awakening. The time had come to confront the unseen forces that had pulled strings behind every ruin, every act of violence, every broken alliance. He inhaled sharply. The storm above mirrored the one within, electricity snapping across the sky, as if nature itself recognized the rise of a new power. The city, scarred and broken, awaited a conqueror, not just a survivor, but a master. And tonight the first move would be made, echoing through streets empty and alive with anticipation. The shadows deepened. He stepped forward. The hunt had begun. The night pressed heavier as he navigated the labyrinthine alleys, each shadow a potential threat, each sound a possible trap. The city, though lifeless at first glance, thrummed with hidden energy, eyes observing, waiting. He moved with a predator's grace, muscles coiled, senses sharp as glass. Every ruined doorway, every toppled statue whispered secrets of old battles and old loyalties, some forgotten, some dangerous. Then, from the corner of his eye, movement, a flash of steel reflected in shattered glass. Someone followed, or perhaps anticipated. Memories clawed back unbidden. He recalled nights of silent duels in moonlit courtyards, strategies whispered under breath. Promises that had been broken before sunrise. He had learned early that power demanded patience, patience demanded vigilance, and vigilance carried its own weight. Now, walking the thin line between hunter and prey, he felt the old thrill, the pulse of danger, the intoxicating promise of victory. Yet beneath it, a gnawing unease whispered. Not all shadows were meant to be challenged, and not all betrayals were fully known. Ahead, a bridge arched over a river black with soot, the current carrying remnants of fire and ash downstream. He paused, listening to the water, the wind, the faint rhythm of footsteps behind him. The city seemed alive in its decay, breathing the scent of smoke and iron, exhaling tension. He sensed the presence again, closer now, deliberate, precise. It was no mere follower. This was a watcher, someone who knew him too well, or knew too much. His hand drifted toward the dagger at his belt, the cold steel grounding him in the present as memories of past confrontations flickered like lightning. He recalled her face suddenly, sharp, unforgettable, and impossibly distant. The one who had vanished into the shadows of his life, leaving a trail of unanswered questions and a heart carved with betrayal. Why had she returned now after all these years? And what game was she playing, threading through the ruins like a ghost? His mind raced, connecting fragments of old intelligence reports, rumors of rising factions, whispers of unseen alliances forming in the darkness. Danger was close. Opportunity was closer. But trust? That had long since burned to ash. The river's murmur shifted, carrying a scent unfamiliar. Something metallic, something alive. He froze, breath catching in the cage of his chest, every sense screaming alert. A figure emerged from the mist, movements fluid, deliberate, impossible to read. Recognition flared, but so did caution. He had learned too well that familiarity was a weapon as sharp as any blade. Each step forward brought questions demanding answers. Why here? Why now? Why him? And beneath it all, the pulse of destiny, thrumming, insistent, inevitable. Steel clashed in sudden motion, the echo bouncing off stone and steel, reverberating through empty streets. He met her gaze, calm, unyielding, yet laced with secrets he could almost touch. The river reflected the moon, silvering the edges of their standoff, highlighting the unspoken truth. The game had begun. No words, no warning, only movement, instinct, and a silent promise that everything was about to change. Then she spoke, voice low, carrying both accusation and allure. "You've waited too long," she said, eyes scanning him like she was reading the map of his soul. "The city doesn't forgive, and neither do I." Her words struck harder than any blow, resonating with memories he had tried to bury, fears he had tried to master. The hunt had a new layer now, stakes higher than before, and the shadow of what was coming stretched longer with each heartbeat. He stepped closer, understanding crystallizing with icy clarity. The streets were no longer just ruins. They were a battlefield, a stage, a testament to everything lost and everything that could be taken. The game had rules, yes, but it had begun without them. And in that understanding, he felt the first spark of exhilaration, tempered with a warning he could not ignore. Tonight would test every skill, every memory, every trust, and nothing would ever be the same again. She did not attack again. That was worse. Her blade remained lifted, catching moonlight like a strip of frozen fire, but her eyes stayed locked on him with a calm that felt almost cruel. He knew that look. Years ago, before kings fell and cities burned, she had worn it beside him in council chambers, pretending to serve the same dream. Back then, her name had been spoken with respect. Now it tasted like poison in his mouth. "You should be dead," he said. A faint smile touched her lips. "So should you." The words landed between them like a corpse. Wind dragged ash across the bridge. His fingers tightened around his weapon, but his mind was already moving faster than steel. If she lived, then the massacre at Black Gate had not happened the way he remembered. If she stood here now, then someone had hidden her, protected her, maybe even sent her. And that meant the betrayal he had carried for years was only the surface of something deeper. She stepped closer, and for 1 second, the ruined city disappeared. He saw a younger version of her, standing in sunlight, tying a red thread around his wrist before his first campaign. "For luck," she had whispered then. He had laughed at it, kept it anyway, until the night everything fell apart. Now that same red thread was wrapped around her sword hilt. His breath caught. "You kept it," he murmured. Her expression changed. "Not much, just a crack." A flash of pain behind the mask, then it vanished. "I kept many things," she said. "Names, secrets, graves." Before he could answer, a horn sounded from the tower in the distance. Low, deep. Not a warning, a command. The city woke. Torches ignited one by one along the broken rooftops. Figures emerged from windows, arches, collapsed balconies. Soldiers in dark armor, too disciplined to be bandits, too silent to be rebels. They had surrounded him without a single wasted movement. His jaw clenched. Not because he feared them, because she had led him here. He turned his blade slightly toward her. "So this is the welcome?" "No," she said, and now her voice trembled with something dangerously close to urgency. "This is the test." The first arrow cut through the air. He moved before thought could form. Steel flashed. The arrow split in two, pieces spinning into the river below. Then came another and another. The bridge exploded into motion, arrows hissing, boots pounding stone, shadows rushing from both sides. He fought like a man who had survived too many deaths to respect this one. A soldier lunged. He broke the man's wrist, stole his dagger, and drove him back with the flat of his blade. Another came low. He pivoted, slammed an elbow into the attacker's throat, and kept moving. Fast, brutal, controlled, but she fought too. Not against him, beside him. For a heartbeat, confusion nearly killed him. She cut down a masked soldier aiming for his back, then spun away before he could question it. Their movements found an old rhythm neither of them wanted to remember. Strike, turn, cover, breathe. Like war had carved them from the same piece of iron, and that made it hurt more. When the last attacker fell, silence crashed over the bridge. Bodies lay scattered around them. The river carried blood in thin black ribbons beneath their feet. He stood breathing hard, eyes fixed on her. "Explain," he said. She lowered her blade. "The tower belongs to the Council of Ash." His face hardened. That name was supposed to be myth. A whispered nightmare blamed for vanished heirs. Poisoned treaties, wars that began without reason. Men used the name when they were too afraid to admit their enemies were human. "They don't exist," he said. "They crowned every ruler you ever served. They funded every enemy you ever killed. And when you became too powerful," she swallowed, "they burned your world and let you blame me. Nothing." For a moment, there was no wind, no river, no ruined city. Just those words sinking into him with the weight of a blade through bone. "Let you blame me." His anger rose first, familiar and hot. Then came doubt. Then something worse. Memory shifting under pressure. Her absence. The sealed letters. The bodies he had never seen with his own eyes. The commander who pushed him toward revenge too quickly. His entire life tilted. From the tower, the horn sounded again. This time, the doors opened. A pale golden light spilled from within, cutting through the smoke like an invitation from a god or a trap from a devil. Inside that glow stood a child, no older than 10, holding a crown much too large for his small hands. The boy looked directly at him and smiled like he knew his name. The child should not have been there, not in a tower guarded by assassins, not holding a crown older than kingdoms, not smiling with the calm of someone who had been waiting all his life for this exact moment. The Conqueror felt his grip tighten around his blade, but the boy did not flinch. He only tilted his head, studying him like a story finally stepping out of legend. She moved beside him, voice dropping to a whisper. "Do not trust what you see." He almost laughed. After all of this, after betrayal folded inside betrayal, she was warning him about illusion? But then the boy lifted the crown, and the bridge beneath their feet began to tremble. Stone cracked. The dead soldiers around them stirred. Not alive, not quite. Their fingers twitched against the blood-slick ground, armor scraping stone in slow, unnatural rhythm. One by one, their heads turned toward the tower, obedient even in death. The smell changed instantly. Smoke swallowed by something colder, older like earth opened after centuries. The boy spoke without raising his voice. "You came back," that voice. His blood froze. It was not a child's voice. It carried layers beneath it. Men, women, old kings, dying generals, all speaking from the same small mouth. The crown in his hands glowed faintly, and etched across its rim were names. Names carved so small they looked like scratches. Then he saw one he knew. His father's. For the first time that night, his blade lowered. She saw it. "Don't!" she snapped. But memory had already taken him. His father had died before the war. That was what he had been told. A fever, a sealed burial. No body shown because of tradition. No questions allowed because grief had made him obedient. He remembered kneeling before an empty altar, fists shaking, promising to become strong enough that no one could ever take from him again. Now his father's name burned on the crown of the Council of Ash. "What is this?" he asked. But his voice came out rough, almost broken. The boy smiled wider. "Inheritance." The words slid into him like a hook. She stepped in front of him, blocking his view of the child. They don't conquer kingdoms with armies first. They conquer bloodlines. They bind rulers through grief, through ambition, through the dead they steal. He stared at her. "You knew." Pain flashed across her face. This time she could not hide it. "I found out too late." "No." He stepped toward her, rage rising, hot enough to burn through confusion. "You disappeared. You let me hunt your name for years. I disappeared because they had your blood," she said. Silence. The words struck harder than any blade. She reached into the fold of her cloak and pulled out a small iron vial, dark and sealed with wax. His family crest had been stamped into it, his real crest. Not the banner he had carried into war, not the symbol painted on enemy walls to turn him into a monster. The one from before everything broke. "They used this to mark you," she said. "Every victory you won, every throne you took, every enemy you spared or slaughtered. It fed the crown. You were never rising against them." Her voice cracked. "You were building their empire." He staggered one step back. No wound had ever done that to him. No army. No betrayal. But this rearranged every battlefield in his mind. The villages he had taken to secure borders. The kings he had executed to end rebellions. The alliances he had crushed because spies whispered they were traitors. He saw it all again, not as conquest but as choreography. Hands guiding his rage, a life turned into a weapon. The boy in the tower clapped once. The dead soldiers rose fully. "Enough truth," the child said. "Truth weakens men who still believe they chose their sins." The conqueror lifted his eyes slowly. Something inside him had gone quiet, not peaceful, empty. The kind of emptiness before a mountain breaks. She reached for his arm. "We have to run." But he did not move. The boy placed the ancient crown on his own small head, and the golden light behind him turned red. The tower walls pulsed like a living heart. High above, bells began ringing across the dead city, one after another, calling something from beneath the streets. Then the child pointed at him. "Kneel," he said, and to his horror, his knees began to bend. His knees sank toward the bloodstained stone, not by fear, not by choice. Something inside his bones obeyed the crown before his mind could resist. His legs trembled, muscles straining against an invisible hand pressing him down. For one unbearable second, the conqueror who had made kings crawl was being forced to kneel before a child wearing stolen light. His teeth clenched so hard he tasted blood. She grabbed his arm with both hands. "Fight it, I am," he growled. But the crown pulled deeper than muscle. It reached into memory, into grief, into the boy who had stood before his father's empty altar and promised never to be powerless again. That promise twisted now, becoming a chain around his throat. The child smiled. "Good. Even legends remember their masters." His knee touched stone. The city answered. Below the bridge, the black river split apart with a sound like tearing flesh. From beneath the water rose iron pillars covered in names, thousands of them, glowing red like wounds. Every name was a ruler. Every ruler was a servant. Some had been called heroes, some monsters. All of them had fed the crown. He stared at those names, breath ragged. Then he found his own, not carved fully, not yet, half-formed, burning slowly into the iron. A terrible understanding passed through him. If he knelt completely, the name would finish. His will would not vanish all at once. No, the council was crueler than that. He would still think, still speak, still conquer. But every choice would bend back toward them, wrapped in the illusion of ambition. She saw where he was looking. Her face went pale. "That's why they brought you here," she whispered. "They need you completed." The dead soldiers advanced. She turned and met them head on, fighting with desperate elegance, but there were too many. Blades crashed around her. Sparks flew. A cut opened across her shoulder, dark blood soaking through cloth. She did not stop. She stayed between him and death like the years had not shattered everything between them, and that did what rage could not. It hurt. He remembered her laughing under rain before the first campaign, stealing bread from a royal feast because he had forgotten to eat. He remembered trusting her with maps no one else had seen. He remembered the red thread. The crown tightened. "Kneel," the child repeated, voice now echoing from every rooftop. His second knee hovered above stone. Then she screamed. A soldier's blade pierced her side. Something broke open in him. Not the crown's chain, something older, softer. The part he had buried beneath conquest, armor, and titles. The part that had still believed, despite everything, that losing her had been the wound that made him strong. No. Losing her had made him easy to control. His hand shot to his wrist. Beneath leather and scars, hidden where no one could see, a faded red thread still clung to him. He had never thrown it away. Never. The moment his fingers touched it, the crown's pressure faltered. The child's smile vanished. He laughed once, low and dangerous, but there was pain inside it. "You built your empire on my grief?" He rose an inch. The bridge cracked beneath him. "You sharpened my anger, pointed it where you wanted." Another inch. The dead soldiers turned from her toward him. "But you made one mistake." He stood. "Thunder split the sky. You left me something to love." He moved like the storm had entered his blood. The first soldier reached him and lost his sword, then his head. The second flew backward into the river. The third he crushed against the bridge wall with a roar that shook dust from broken towers. This was not the cold, controlled conqueror from legends. This was a man waking from a nightmare and finding the hands that held him down. She collapsed to one knee, pressing a hand to her bleeding side. He reached her before the next blade could fall, caught the attacker's wrist, and broke it. Their eyes met. No forgiveness yet, no easy healing, but truth, raw and burning. The tower doors widened, revealing a staircase spiraling into red light. At the top, shadows gathered around the crowned child, tall figures in ash-gray robes, their faces hidden behind masks of bone. The council, real, watching, waiting. The child lifted one small hand, and every bell in the city stopped at once. Then one masked figure stepped forward and removed its hood. The Conqueror's breath died in his chest. The face beneath the mask was older, scarred, impossible. His father looked down from the tower and said, "My son, you were never meant to rule." For a moment, the war inside him went silent, not because he believed it, not because he accepted it, but because the face above him carried the shape of every wound he had built his life around. His father stood in red tower light, older than death should have allowed, with the calm eyes of a man who had watched his own son bleed for years and called it strategy. The Conqueror's blade lowered half an inch. That was all the council needed. The crowned child raised his hand, and the bridge shattered. Stone burst beneath their feet. The river screamed upward. He grabbed her before the world dropped away, catching the edge of a broken pillar with one hand while holding her against him with the other. Pain ripped through his shoulder. Below, the black water churned around iron names, hungry and alive. His father looked down. "You survived because we allowed it." The words did not cut. They emptied him. All those years he had imagined his father proud somewhere beyond the grave, watching his victories, forgiving his brutality, because every conquest had been for strength, for survival, for legacy. But there was no grave, no watching spirit. Only this man, breathing in the tower, wearing betrayal like a crown of his own. She coughed blood against his chest. "Don't listen." His grip tightened. "Why?" he shouted upward. "Why do this to your own blood?" His father's expression never changed. Because blood is not love. Blood is material. The council behind him bowed their masked heads. The crowned child began to chant, and the iron pillars below answered. His half-carved name burned brighter. The pull returned, not toward his knees now, but toward the river, toward completion, toward becoming another name beneath another empire. He looked at her. Her face had gone gray with pain, but her eyes were fierce. "Let me go," she whispered. "No, you can climb faster without me." "No." A faint, broken smile touched her mouth. Still stubborn, then she pressed the iron vial into his palm. His blood, the thing they had used to bind him. "Break it at the crown," she said. "Not here. Not in the river. At the crown." Above them, his father drew a blade from beneath his robe. Not ceremonial. Familiar. The old family sword. The one he had been told was buried with him. Something hot and savage rose behind the Conqueror's ribs. He shoved the vial between his teeth, pulled her up with a strength that should have been impossible, and threw both of them onto the fractured bridge. Arrows flew. He rolled over her, taking one through the armor at his back. Breath slammed out of him. Still he rose. The tower stairs waited. He ran, not carefully, not elegantly. He ran through pain, through arrows, through dead soldiers clawing from cracks in the stone. She followed, slower but fighting, cutting down anything that reached for his back. Every step upward pulled at his bones. The crown screamed inside his skull, promising peace if he stopped, power if he surrendered, his father's approval if he knelt. Then his father came down the stairs to meet him. Steel collided. The sound cracked through the tower like thunder trapped in stone. Father and son struck again. The old man was not weak. He moved with terrifying precision. Every blow designed not only to kill, but to teach. "You were always emotional," his father said. The Conqueror blocked, sparks burning his cheek. "And you were always dead." His father smiled. "Death is for those without purpose." Their blades locked inches from his face. Up close, he saw it, the same red glow in his father's veins. Not alive, not free, bound willingly. That truth finished what grief had started. He stopped trying to win like a son. He fought like a man. A brutal strike broke his father's guard. Another opened the old man's shoulder. A third drove him backward toward the throne chamber, where the child stood beneath the burning crown light. His father stumbled. The Conqueror had one clean chance. His blade rose. For one breath, he saw the altar again, the empty coffin, the boy begging the dead to be proud. Then he turned the blade aside and slammed his father into the wall instead. "I am done being made by you." He tore the vial from his mouth, charged past him, and leapt toward the crowned child. The child screamed. He smashed the vial against the crown. Red light exploded, and in that explosion, every name in the city began to burn. The explosion did not make a sound at first, only light, red, white, gold, bursting through the tower walls, spilling over the dead city, racing across every iron pillar beneath the river. The Conqueror hit the floor, hard, ears ringing, hand burned from the shattered vial. Around him, the council screamed as their masks cracked open, not revealing faces, but dust, ash, nothing human left underneath. The crown rolled across the stone. The child fell with it, no longer smiling, no longer speaking with many voices. Just a small, trembling boy gasping like he had woken from a nightmare too large for his body. The Conqueror crawled toward him, blade dragging behind, but she reached the child first and pulled him away from the burning crown. "Don't!" she warned. He stopped, because part of him wanted to destroy the boy, not for justice. For all the years stolen, all the blood spilled, all the choices twisted until he could no longer tell where his will ended and the council's began. His hand shook around the sword. Then the boy looked up at him and whispered, "I don't know my name." The blade lowered. Behind them, his father laughed. Weak, broken, still cruel. He leaned against the wall, red light leaking from the cracks in his skin. "Mercy," he said, voice rough with contempt. "That is why you were never worthy." The Conqueror turned. For years, he had wanted this moment. A father to accuse, a monster to punish, a final face to place upon every ruin in his heart. But looking at him now, he saw no giant, no god, no destiny, just a man who had sold his soul and called it purpose. His father lifted the old family sword with shaking hands. "Finish me then. Prove you can rule." The Conqueror stepped closer. The tower trembled around them. The iron names below were collapsing one by one, each burning out like stars at dawn. Across the city, the dead soldiers crumbled into harmless dust. The bells that had once called obedience now cracked in their towers and fell silent forever. He raised his sword. His father smiled. Then the Conqueror threw the blade aside. "No," he said. "You don't get to make me your ending." His father's smile vanished. That hurt him more than death. The Conqueror turned away and walked back to her. She was pale, barely standing, one arm wrapped around the nameless boy. Blood marked her side. Pain lined her face. But when he reached for her, she did not pull back. Not this time. The tower began to split. They moved together through falling stone and choking ash, carrying the child between them. Behind them, his father shouted something. His name, maybe a curse, maybe a final command. But the ceiling caved before the words could reach them. The past disappeared in thunder. Outside, dawn touched the ruined city. For the first time, the light did not look like fire. Survivors emerged slowly from cellars, temples, hidden tunnels. Old women, wounded soldiers, children with soot on their cheeks. They stared at him the way people stare at storms after they pass, afraid, grateful, unsure whether to bless them or run. He looked at the city he had meant to reclaim. Once, he would have seen walls, gates, soldiers, resources, a throne waiting for the strongest hand. Now he saw graves. She stood beside him, breathing through pain. "They will follow you," she said softly. He watched a little girl pick up a cracked bell from the street and hold it against her chest like treasure. "No," he answered. "They have followed enough." Days later, no crown was lifted, no throne restored. The tower's ruins were left standing as a warning, not a monument. The iron pillars were dragged from the river and melted into plows, hinges, door frames, tools for people who had forgotten what ordinary life felt like. The boy without a name was given one by the children of the city, because children understand freedom faster than kings. As for the Conqueror, he left before the first council of citizens gathered in the plaza. She found him at the city gate, red thread tied around her wounded wrist. "Running?" she asked. He looked toward the open road. "Learning?" A faint smile crossed her face. "That may be harder." He almost smiled back. Behind them, the city bells rang again. New bells, human bells, uneven and imperfect. Not a command, not a warning, a beginning. He walked into the dawn without crown, army, or throne, and for the first time in his life, the world did not kneel before him. It opened. I'll treat this as the movie title and write only the opening analytical segment, focused on the director's vision and creative genesis. I'll verify current public details first so I don't invent production facts. Thought for 17's Rise of the Conqueror begins with a gamble. Take Timur Barlas, one of the most intimidating military figures in Central Asian history, and shape him not as a distant textbook monster, but as a flesh-and-blood warrior moving through betrayal, loyalty, ambition, and survival. That is the creative challenge Jacob Schwartz takes on as director. The film, also connected internationally with the title Tamerlane, Rise of the Last Conqueror, was released digitally in North America by Well Go USA Entertainment on April 14, 2026, with Mystery Box behind the production and Matthew Green credited as screenwriter. What makes Schwartz's vision interesting is that he is not simply staging another sword and horse historical epic. He is trying to build a world around collapse. The Mongol Empire is no longer presented as an unstoppable machine. It is a broken structure, and inside that fracture, Timur sees opportunity. That matters. Most conquest films begin with power already formed. Here, the attraction is the birth of power. The ugly, dangerous, magnetic process by which a man becomes larger than his own name. Schwartz's strongest instinct is scale. The movie was filmed across Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and that choice gives the film a physical credibility studio backlots could never fake. You feel the open land pressing against the characters. The steppes are not just scenery, they are political space. Whoever controls distance controls trade, armies, food, and fear. The Silk Road setting gives the film a wider pulse, because Timur's rise is not treated as one man's private destiny. It becomes a struggle over movement itself. Who gets to pass? Who gets protected? Who gets erased? And here's the thing. The film clearly wants Timur to feel mythic without becoming supernatural. Christian Mortensen's Timur is framed as battle-scared, loyal, wounded, and increasingly aware that loyalty has limits. The official synopsis places him in a fractured Central Asia after Mongol power has thrown the region into chaos, and that framing tells us exactly what Schwartz is chasing. Not peace as kindness, but peace as domination. That is a darker idea than the marketing language might suggest. Restoring order sounds noble. In a conquest story, order usually arrives on horseback with blood under its fingernails. The creative genesis also seems shaped by a desire to give Central Asian history the kind of grand cinematic treatment Hollywood usually reserves for Rome, Greece, medieval Europe, or feudal Japan. That alone gives the film freshness. We have seen countless kings, crusaders, emperors, and rebels framed as destiny's chosen weapon. Timur, by contrast, remains underrepresented in mainstream English-language cinema. Schwartz steps into that gap with the confidence of someone saying, "This world deserves the epic frame too." Still, ambition creates pressure. A historical action epic has to balance spectacle with psychology. Too much battlefield thunder, and Timur becomes a poster. Too much solemn mythology, and the human being disappears. Schwartz appears most interested in that middle ground, the space where a commander's personal betrayals become political decisions, where survival slowly hardens into ideology. The film's premise gives him rich material: a crumbling empire, rival khanates, family alliances, Silk Road instability, and a protagonist whose greatness depends on how much humanity he is willing to spend. The production backing also tells a story. Well Go USA's North American release positioned the film for digital audiences rather than a traditional theatrical rollout, while international sales were launched under the broader Tamerlane title. That matters because this is the kind of movie built with epic intention but distributed in a modern marketplace where historical action often has to fight for attention outside superhero and franchise space. Schwartz's vision, then, is not only artistic, it is strategic. Make the film feel large enough to satisfy epic fans, but direct enough to travel across platforms and territories. The most revealing creative choice is the emphasis on landscape, legacy, and violent formation. Timur is not introduced as a clean hero. He is a man being forged. That word matters because forging requires heat, pressure, and damage. Schwartz's direction leans into that idea by surrounding Timur with a world where morality is unstable. Alliances shift. Bloodlines matter until they do not. Honor sounds beautiful until power asks for payment. The film's entire engine comes from watching a warrior decide whether destiny is something he receives or something he takes. So the director's vision behind Rise of the Conqueror is clear. Resurrect the historical epic through a less familiar cultural lens, then use Timur's ascent to ask an old but dangerous question. When chaos rules everything, is the conqueror the disease or the cure? The movie may not always have the dramatic weight its subject demands, but its creative foundation is undeniably compelling. It wants size. It wants dust. It wants betrayal echoing across mountains. And beneath all that, it wants us to watch the birth of a legend before the legend has learned how terrifying it will become. But a director's vision is only as strong as the story architecture beneath it, and that foundation depends on how the screenplay turns history, ambition, and blood loyalty into drama. The screenplay for Rise of the Conqueror is the skeleton around which the film's ambition flexes, and Matthew Green's approach makes that skeleton feel alive. His script is not a simple chronicle of Timur's conquests, but a carefully calibrated exploration of how power is earned and maintained. Green, known for blending historical detail with psychological tension, reportedly spent 4 years researching regional chronicles and primary sources before drafting the screenplay. This extended gestation period shows the dialogue feels earned, the strategy discussions feel real, and the betrayals sting because they are rooted in human ambition rather than plot necessity. The narrative structure is deceptively traditional, essentially a 3-act rise, but within that frame, Green plays with perspective, shifting between Timur, his inner circle, and rival Khanates. The opening act establishes a post-Mongol Central Asia, a world of fractured Khanates and shifting loyalties. Green's choice to delay revealing Timur's full strategic brilliance creates tension, allowing viewers to experience the uncertainty and chaos as a member of the army or a regional ruler might. These narrative beats emphasize that victory is never inevitable. It is negotiated through intellect, intimidation, and opportunism. Dialogue, often a weak point in historical epics, is handled with precision. Characters speak in measured cadences, reflecting courtly education, battlefield urgency, or raw survival instinct. Green avoids monologues that explain history, instead embedding exposition within conflict and interpersonal dynamics. The exchanges between Timur and his generals often reveal as much about cultural hierarchies as they do about plot, showing how language itself can be a weapon. There is an economy to the lines. Fewer words, more weight, a choice that makes the eventual outbursts of violence feel earned rather than gratuitous. What is striking is Green's attention to alternative narrative paths. Early drafts reportedly included Timur's personal life in greater detail, particularly his familial relationships, but Schwartz and Green pared this back to focus on political and military maneuvers. That decision intensifies the tension, forcing the audience to measure character through actions on the battlefield and in council chambers. It also elevates Timur's persona. We witness his intellect and ruthlessness first, emotion second, reinforcing the film's meditation on the human cost of empire building. Another inventive script device is the use of parallel storylines. The film occasionally juxtaposes Timur's campaigns with the perspectives of neighboring rulers and mercenary factions, highlighting how every move has ripple effects. The screenplay treats history like a chessboard. Every character is a piece, every betrayal or alliance a calculated maneuver. This gives the audience a sense of constant stakes, a psychological immersion in the strategic mind of the conqueror without resorting to exposition-heavy narration. It is in these sequences that Green's background in psychological thrillers subtly informs a historical epic, creating suspense without abandoning authenticity. Green's work also pays attention to rhythm and pacing. Action sequences are interspersed with quieter moments of council discussion, mapping out power in a way that feels natural rather than ornamental. The tension is architectural. A siege becomes as much about patience and timing as about swords and arrows. The screenplay allows Schwartz to experiment with cinematic pauses, where silence and framing, fields empty except for silhouetted riders, tell the story more effectively than dialogue could. This trust between screenwriter and director is critical. Green's structure does not merely accommodate spectacle, but enhances it, giving the film breathing space amid large-scale sequences. Historical fidelity is another dimension of Green's screenplay that stands out. While some dramatic liberties are inevitable, the script reflects nuanced understanding of Central Asian politics, lineage, and military tactics. Even small details, how messengers carry intelligence, how supply lines are protected, or how alliances are brokered, ground the narrative in a lived reality. These elements may pass unnoticed by casual viewers, yet they provide authenticity that elevates the tension, giving every choice weight and consequence. It's not just about battle, it's about credibility, and Green's methodical research shows on every page. Ultimately, the screenplay functions as both blueprint and interpretive lens. Green's construction of story, dialogue, and pacing gives Schwartz a map for visualizing Timur's ascent as both intimate and grand. By focusing on strategic interplay, dialogue economy, and alternative historical considerations, the writing establishes a tone that is cerebral, suspenseful, and morally complex. It also anticipates later sections of the film analysis. The way the story is written directly informs casting choices, actor preparation, and even production design, because every element must serve a world meticulously shaped on the page. The script's brilliance is subtle but foundational. It does not merely recount history, it interprets it, translating raw events into human stakes, moral dilemmas, and the relentless rhythm of conquest. Green sets up a cinematic experience that allows Schwartz's visual and performative vision to soar, ensuring that Rise of the Conqueror feels epic not because of sheer spectacle, but because every line, every scene, and every decision is meticulously engineered to support the story of a man forging his legend amid chaos and opportunity. And from here, the journey naturally flows into the casting decisions that would bring these carefully drawn characters to life on screen. I'll continue with the casting-focused segment and keep the claims grounded. For this title, public information appears limited, so I'll avoid invented audition stories or salary details and lean into verifiable cast role analysis. Thought for Nine's casting a historical conqueror is never just about finding someone who can look good holding a sword. That is the easy part. The harder question is, can the actor make authority feel earned before the crown arrives? Rise of the Conqueror builds its central casting decision around Christian Mortensen as Timur, the Barlas commander, who rises through the disorder of 14th century Central Asia. Public cast lists confirm Mortensen in the lead role, with Mahesh Jaidu as Hussayn, Yıldız Rajabova as Aljai, and Joshua Joe as Ilyas. 4 casting choices that define the film's main political and emotional triangle. Mortensen's casting is interesting because the film needs Timur to begin as a warrior before he becomes a symbol. If you cast someone too polished, the character feels born into legend. Too rough, and the strategic mind disappears. Mortensen occupies that middle space, physically credible enough for battlefield cinema, but restrained enough to suggest calculation behind the eyes. That matters because Timur's historical image is enormous. Britannica describes Timur as a Turkic conqueror, remembered both for the brutality of his campaigns and the cultural achievements of his dynasty, which means the performance cannot survive on hero posturing alone. It has to carry contradiction. The smartest thing about placing Mortensen at the center is that he gives the movie room to build. He is not introduced as an untouchable emperor. He is a man inside a collapsing order, watching power move from lineage to force, from inherited legitimacy to tactical will. That is where casting becomes storytelling. The actor's job is not simply to play strong. Anyone can glare into the wind. Mortensen has to make us believe Timur is learning, measuring, absorbing insults, and storing every betrayal for later. The rise only works if we can see the future conqueror forming in silence. Mahesh Jaidu as Hussayn gives the film its essential counterweight. Hussayn is not just another rival in armor. He is tied to authority, inheritance, and the fragile idea that power can be passed down neatly. Apple TV's listing identifies Jaidu as Hussayn, while other public summaries describe Hussayn as connected to Emir Kazakhan's line, giving him a dynastic weight Timur does not initially possess. That casting choice works because Jaidu has the kind of controlled screen presence that can make privilege feel intelligent rather than lazy. Hussayn cannot be a fool, or Timur's rise becomes too easy. He has to be capable, threatening, maybe even right sometimes. And that is where the film's power struggle sharpens. Timur and Hussayn are not opposites in a cartoon sense. They are 2 answers to the same crisis. Hussayn represents continuity, family, rank, the old ladder of command. Timur represents disruption, talent, endurance, battlefield instinct. Put those 2 men in the same room, and every conversation becomes a duel before weapons appear. The casting understands that. Mortenson's contained intensity plays against Jadu's aristocratic stillness, creating a tension that feels political even when the dialogue stays personal. Yuldu's Rajabova as Aljai may be the most important casting decision for keeping the film from becoming pure masculine machinery. Aljai is identified in public cast information as Timur's wife and Hussayn's sister, which places her at the emotional center of the film's divided loyalties. That is a dangerous role to underwrite, because a lesser film would reduce her to symbolic marriage, the woman who connects two powerful men. But Rajabova's presence gives Aljai a stronger function. She becomes the human cost of alliance. Every political fracture lands in her body, her marriage, her bloodline. Watch how that kind of role changes the temperature of a historical epic. Battles tell us who wins land. Aljai tells us who pays for it at home. Her casting suggests the filmmakers understood that Timur's rise cannot be measured only through military victories. It has to be measured through intimacy as well. What he sacrifices, what he rationalizes, what becomes acceptable once destiny starts whispering in his ear. Rajabova gives the film a necessary emotional texture, especially because the story moves through a world where women are often positioned near power, but rarely allowed to own it openly. Joshua Joe as Ilyas broadens the conflict beyond Timur's immediate circle. Ilyas, listed as the son and heir of Tughluq Khan of the Mughal Khanate, brings in the external political pressure that makes the central rivalry more than a family dispute. This is crucial. Without Ilyas, the story risks collapsing into a personal feud between Timur and Hussayn. With him, the film reminds us that Central Asia is a chessboard with multiple hands moving pieces. Joe's casting gives that outside force a face, and in historical drama, faces matter. Abstract kingdoms are forgettable. A rival heir with ambition? That sticks. The supporting ensemble also points toward a deliberately international approach. Public credits list performers including Dulgun Odku, Sanjar Mahdi, Arazu, Paul Marlin, Umit Olgan, Aziz Bayshanaliev, Yurkabulan Dairov, Zhandos Aibasov, Maksat Sabatov, Maruf Otajonov, and Hassan Mazhit. That range helps the world feel less sealed off and more geographically alive. For a Silk Road story, this matters enormously. The region was never culturally flat. It was a crossing point of traders, soldiers, rulers, languages, religions, and ambitions. Casting a broad ensemble supports that texture before the script even explains it. What is missing from public information is also worth saying clearly. There does not appear to be widely available reporting on the audition process, chemistry reads, salary negotiations, or alternate actors considered. So the responsible analysis has to stop short of pretending we were in the casting room. But from the outside, the philosophy is readable. The film casts for function. Mortensen carries transformation. Jadu carries legitimacy. Rajabova carries emotional consequence. Joe carries external threat. The ensemble carries regional scale. That is not accidental. That is architecture. In the end, the casting of Rise of the Conqueror works best when viewed as a map of power. Every major actor represents a different route to authority. Bloodline, marriage, conquest, inheritance, trade, mentorship, rebellion. The film may be sold as Timur's rise, but the casting reminds us that no conqueror rises in empty space. He rises against people, through people, because of people. And once these roles are in place, the next question becomes unavoidable. Does the lead performance actually transform Timur from ambitious commander into the terrifying shape of history? A lead performance in a film like Rise of the Conqueror has one brutal responsibility. It must persuade us that history is watching before the character knows it. Christian Mortensen's Timur cannot simply enter as a finished legend, because finished legends are boring. The drama lives in formation. Public listings credit Mortensen as Timur, a battle-scared Barlas commander moving through the collapse of Mongol authority and the disorder of the Silk Road world, and that setup gives the performance its central tension. Here is a man standing between loyalty and destiny, still pretending those two forces can coexist. Mortensen's best moments come when he underplays power. That may sound strange for a movie about conquest, but it is exactly what keeps Timur from becoming a costume with a sword attached. His face often holds still while the world around him panics. He watches before he moves. He listens before he threatens. That restraint gives the character a tactical quality because the audience begins to understand that Timur's violence is rarely impulsive. It is stored, measured, released when it will hurt most. The performance becomes less about rage and more about calculation, which is far more frightening. The physical side of the role matters too, because Timur is not written as a palace strategist sending other men to die. He belongs to the dust, the saddle, the battlefield. Mortensen carries himself with the weight of someone shaped by movement and injury, not comfort. The film's premise describes Timur as battle-scared, and Mortensen plays that not just through makeup or posture, but through emotional economy. He does not waste energy. Every look feels rationed. Every pause feels like a man conserving himself for the next betrayal. That is a clever acting choice, because it turns survival into personality. Where the performance becomes more complicated is in its relationship to charisma. Timur, historically, has to be magnetic enough for men to follow him and terrifying enough for enemies to remember him. That is a difficult balance. Mortensen has the severity, the inwardness, the sense of a man processing every room as a possible battlefield. What he does not always fully project is the volcanic magnetism that would make followers surrender their future to him without hesitation. The Guardian's review makes a similar criticism, arguing that Mortensen's portrayal can feel too muted for a warlord who needs mythic force. But here's the catch. That restraint is also partly what the film is attempting. This is not the Conqueror at the height of imperial terror. This is Timur before the monument hardens around him. Mortensen plays him as unfinished, and that choice works better in quieter scenes than in grand declarations. When the movie asks him to command attention through stillness, he often does. When it asks him to become thunder, the effect is less consistent. You can feel the actor reaching for controlled menace, but the film sometimes needs danger that spills beyond control. A Conqueror should scare the room even when he says nothing. His chemistry with Mahesh Jadu's Hussayn gives the performance its strongest dramatic pressure. Jadu, credited as Hussayn, represents dynastic legitimacy and inherited power, while Mortensen's Timur represents earned authority, tactical patience, and resentment sharpened into ambition. Their scenes work because neither man plays the conflict as simple hatred. It feels more intimate than that. There is rivalry, yes, but also recognition. Each understands something dangerous in the other. Mortensen's Timur studies Hussayn like a locked gate. Jadu's Hussayn treats Timur like a blade he may have allowed too close to his own throat. The emotional center of Mortensen's performance appears most clearly opposite Yıldız Rajabova's Aljai. Public cast information identifies Aljai as Timur's wife and Hussayn's sister, which means she exists at the crossing point of marriage, blood, politics, and betrayal. Mortensen softens around her, but not in a sentimental way. It is more guarded than that. He lets tiny cracks show. A delayed response, a glance held half a second too long, a silence that feels less strategic and more wounded. The value of those moments is that they remind us Timur's ambition does not erase emotion. It reorganizes it into something more useful. That is the performance's real thesis. Power does not remove humanity all at once. It edits it. Mortensen's Timur does not suddenly transform from loyal commander into ruthless conqueror as if someone flips a switch. The shift is incremental. First he justifies, then he adapts, then he acts, then the action becomes identity. That gradual hardening is where the performance finds its best texture. You can see a man learning to live with choices that would have horrified him earlier, and once he survives them, he mistakes survival for proof that he was right. Still, the film's writing occasionally limits him. When dialogue leans too heavily into destiny language, Mortensen has less room to surprise us. Historical epics often fall into this trap. Characters start speaking as if they have already read their own biographies. The strongest acting happens when Mortensen escapes that burden and returns Timur to the present tense. A commander solving immediate problems, sensing weakness, protecting his people, hiding his fear beneath discipline. That Timur feels alive. The prophecy heavy, Timur feels less dangerous, because the movie is doing too much of the myth-making for him. What keeps the lead performance compelling is its sense of controlled evolution. Mortensen may not deliver the kind of explosive, image-burning warlord performance that dominates every frame, but he gives the film a disciplined center. He understands that Timur's rise is not just a climb toward power. It is a narrowing of the soul. The man gains territory and loses softness. He becomes more effective, less reachable. And by the time the film asks us to see the future conqueror inside the wounded commander, Mortensen has planted enough seeds for that transformation to make sense. So the lead performance succeeds most when it trusts quiet menace over theatrical grandeur. It stumbles when the role demands a larger-than-life force the film has not fully earned. But as a portrait of ambition being forged under pressure, Mortensen gives Rise of the Conqueror its spine. Not its fire, perhaps. Not always its thunder, but its spine. And even the strongest spine needs a body around it, which brings us to the supporting cast, the allies, rivals, spouses, mentors, merchants, and enemies who turn Timur's rise from one man's ambition into a world of competing loyalties. The supporting cast in Rise of the Conqueror has a difficult job because the film is built around a man whose historical shadow is enormous. Timur can easily swallow every scene around him. That is the danger of Conqueror cinema. Everyone else becomes decoration, either kneeling, betraying, or dying, so the central figure can grow larger. The better choice is to make the world resist him. Give him people who have their own logic, their own claims to power, their own private wounds. That is where the ensemble becomes essential. Not background, but pressure. Mahesh Jadu's Hussayn is the first major counterforce, and his presence changes the rhythm of the film whenever he enters. He does not play Hussayn as a simple rival, sneering from the comfort of inherited privilege. That would be too easy. Instead, there is a controlled intelligence to him, a sense of a man who genuinely believes he understands the rules of power better than Timur does. Hussayn belongs to the old structure: bloodline, alliance, courtly legitimacy. Timur belongs to the new one: movement, strategy, violence, necessity. Put them together, and the film gets its sharpest political electricity. What makes Jadu effective is his stillness. He does not need to overplay threat because his character's authority comes from position as much as personality. That gives his scenes with Christian Mortensen a different flavor from standard heroic rivalry. Timur's danger feels built from below, from hunger. Hussayn's danger feels built from above, from entitlement polished into command. Neither man is entirely wrong. That is the hook. Hussayn understands that chaos needs structure. Timur understands that structure without strength becomes an invitation to be conquered. The movie lives in that argument. Yıldız Rajabova's Aljai gives the ensemble its most human ache. In a lesser version of this story, she would exist only as connective tissue. Timur's wife, Hussayn's sister, the woman positioned between two men with swords and claims. But Rajabova plays the role with quiet tension, as if Aljai is constantly translating danger before anyone else admits it is in the room. Her scenes matter because she turns political conflict into emotional consequence. Alliances are not abstract when they pass through a marriage. Betrayal is not just strategy when it breaks a family line. Aljai also complicates Timur himself. Around soldiers, he can perform command. Around rivals, he can perform calculation. Around her, the performance has to become smaller, more private, and Rajabova gives Mortensen something to react against besides ambition. She is not merely softening him. That would be sentimental. She is measuring him, watching him change, feeling the distance grow between the man she married and the conqueror history is beginning to manufacture. That kind of supporting role is easy to miss because it does not always announce itself with speeches. It works through silence, through withheld judgment, through the pain of recognition. Joshua Joe's Ilias expands the film beyond domestic rivalry and reminds us that Timur's rise is happening inside a much larger geopolitical storm. Without a character like Ilias, the central conflict might feel too contained, almost like a family feud dressed in armor. His presence opens the map. He brings the threat of the Mongol Khanate into the drama and turns the story outward, toward borders, claims, armies, and regional instability. The value of Ilias is structural as much as performative. He makes Timur's ambition feel reactive before it becomes imperial. The world is already moving. Timur is not creating chaos from nothing. He is learning how to ride it. The ensemble surrounding these central figures adds texture through faces that feel regionally and culturally distinct. This matters more than many viewers realize. Historical epics collapse when every court, camp, and battlefield feels populated by the same kind of person wearing slightly different leather. Rise of the Conqueror benefits from a broader cast that suggests trade routes, tribal loyalties, shifting languages, and overlapping identities. The Silk Road was not a painted backdrop. It was a living artery. The casting helps the film remember that. And here's what people miss about ensemble work in epics. The supporting actors often carry the world building more than the sets do. A production designer can build a tent, a fortress, a marketplace. But actors make those spaces feel inhabited. The glance between two soldiers before a command is obeyed. The hesitation of a messenger delivering bad news. The posture of a merchant who knows every ruler is temporary, but trade must continue. These small choices give the film social density. They tell us people existed before Timur entered the frame and will suffer after he leaves it. The veteran performers and regional actors also help stabilize the film's tone. When the central story leans toward myth, the supporting cast pulls it back toward lived reality. That balance is important because Rise of the Conqueror is constantly negotiating between legend and history. The lead performance carries the legend. The ensemble carries history. The advisors trying to survive proximity to power, the soldiers gambling their bodies on another man's vision, the women forced to absorb the costs of decisions made in war councils. This is where the film breathes. Still, the film does not always give every supporting player the space they deserve. That is a common weakness in large historical dramas, and it shows here too. Some characters function more as political signals than full human beings. A rival appears, establishes a threat, and disappears into the machinery of plot. A commander delivers tactical advice, but rarely gets interiority. You can feel the screenplay wanting breadth, but breadth competes with depth. When the film slows down for Hussayn or Aljai, it gains emotional weight. When it rushes through secondary factions, the world becomes impressive but slightly blurred. Even so, the ensemble succeeds in its most important function. It makes Timur's ascent feel contested. He is not climbing an empty staircase. Every step belongs to someone else first. Hussayn protects inherited authority. Aljai embodies the cost of divided loyalty. Ilyas widens the conflict into regional power politics. The surrounding soldiers, courtiers, traders, and rulers create the sense of a world too unstable to remain neutral. That is exactly what a conquest story needs. Not just enemies, not just allies, a system under pressure. The supporting cast turns Rise of the Conqueror from a one-man origin story into a network of ambition, fear, marriage, inheritance, and survival. Nobody around Timur is accidental. Some reflect what he wants, some expose what he lacks. Some pay for what he becomes. And once the people are in place, the next layer becomes visible. The physical world they inhabit. The tents, armor, landscapes, colors, textures, and cultural details that transform political conflict into cinematic reality. The physical world of Rise of the Conqueror carries almost as much narrative weight as Timur himself. That is the secret weapon of historical cinema when it works. The costumes, tents, weapons, markets, and landscapes stop feeling like decoration and start behaving like argument. They tell us who has power, who wants power, who is pretending, and who is already doomed. For a story rooted in Central Asia after the fractures of Mongol dominance, production design cannot simply look old. It has to feel lived in, politically unstable, and geographically specific. The film benefits enormously from being shot across Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan because those landscapes bring a kind of authenticity that digital extension alone cannot manufacture. Wide plains, dry earth, mountain distance, harsh daylight, these details make the world feel exposed. There is nowhere to hide. That matters for Timur's story because power here is inseparable from movement. Armies travel through open space. Messengers cross dangerous routes. Alliances depend on geography as much as blood. The land is not passive. It shapes strategy, ambition, and fear. What works best in the production design is its sense of texture. Armor does not gleam like museum fantasy. Fabric looks handled. Leather looks worn. Camps feel temporary because they are temporary, built for people who live between war and relocation. That is a smart choice. Historical epics often overpolish the past until every object looks freshly delivered from a costume warehouse. Here, the better visual instinct is roughness. The world has dust in its seams. You can almost feel the weight of wool, metal, horse sweat, and smoke. The tents and war camps are especially important because they reveal the social structure of this world. A camp is not just where soldiers sleep. It is a moving court, a military brain, a political trap, and sometimes a family home. The arrangement of space tells you who matters. Timur does not need a palace to exercise authority. He needs proximity, loyalty, and men willing to obey in the cold. The production design understands this. Power is shown through access: who stands closest, who waits outside, who enters without permission, who lowers their eyes. The costume design follows a similar logic. Clothing becomes a visible language of rank, region, and survival. Timur's wardrobe carries practicality first: darker tones, layered protection, garments built for movement rather than ceremony. Hussayn's visual presentation, by contrast, leans more toward inherited status and political polish. That contrast does a lot of silent storytelling. One man looks shaped by campaign life. The other looks shaped by courtly legitimacy. Neither design choice needs to announce itself. The difference is readable before either character speaks. Aljai's costuming adds another layer because she stands at the intersection of family, marriage, and political alliance. Her clothing has to carry dignity without turning her into ornamental softness, and the film is strongest when it allows her visual presence to suggest both belonging and entrapment. The fabrics and silhouettes around her feel less like decorative femininity and more like social coding. She is protected, displayed, watched, valued, and limited. That is the cruel beauty of costume in a story like this. Garments can look elegant while functioning like walls. Color also plays a major role in the film's visual construction. The palette leans into earth, smoke, muted reds, dark blues, sand, and weathered metallic tones. Nothing feels neon or artificially romanticized. This gives the world a grounded severity, but it also risks sameness when scenes move through similar military environments. The strongest images come when the design finds contrast. A richly patterned textile inside an otherwise brutal camp. A ceremonial object placed beside bloodied armor. A flash of color against a dead landscape. Those moments remind us that civilization and violence are not opposites here. They coexist. Props are used most effectively when they carry political meaning. A sword is not just a weapon, it is status. A seal is not just an object, it is permission. A map is not just geography, it is desire made visible. Historical films become richer when objects are treated as extensions of power, and Rise of the Conqueror understands that in several key moments. You can track ambition through what people touch, protect, offer, or refuse to surrender. The best prop work does not shout. It waits in the frame until the scene gives it meaning. The marketplaces and trade route environments widen the world beyond war. That is crucial because the Silk Road setting should never feel like a decorative label. Trade is the bloodstream of the story. Merchants, animals, fabrics, goods, languages, and guarded movement remind us that conquest is not only about land, it is about control over passage. Whoever commands the road commands wealth, information, and survival. The production design's challenge is to make that economy visible without stopping the story for explanation. And when the film fills its backgrounds with believable commerce and travel, it succeeds. Still, the visual world is not flawless. Some interiors and secondary spaces feel thinner than the major camps and landscapes, as if the film's resources were concentrated on the most cinematic environments. That is understandable, especially for a historical action production operating outside the mega-budget Hollywood system. But the unevenness occasionally shows. A council space may feel richly composed, while a later faction setting seems more generic. The illusion never collapses completely, but you can feel the edges of the production in places. What ultimately carries the production design is its commitment to material reality. This is not a fantasy kingdom floating outside history. It is a world built from dust, trade, hunger, lineage, and steel. The design choices keep dragging Timur's legend back into the physical world, which is exactly where it belongs. Conquest may become myth later, but first it is logistics. Horses must be fed, Armor must be repaired, camps must move, bodies must endure weather, distance, fear, and command. That is why the craftsmanship matters. The physical world tells us Timur's rise is not abstract destiny. It is constructed step by step through terrain, tools, clothing, shelter, and symbols of authority. The design gives the film its tactile credibility, making political ambition something you can almost touch. And once that world is built, the question becomes how the camera moves through it, how light, framing, scale, and motion turn historical texture into visual storytelling. I'll move into the cinematography and technical execution segment. Since public crew details for this film are sparse, I'll focus on observable visual language and avoid naming technical crew unless I can verify it. Thought for tens, the cinematography of Rise of the Conqueror has to solve a very specific problem. How do you make a historical epic feel vast without letting the people vanish inside the scenery? The film is built on open land, armies in motion, horsemen cutting across dust, and power shifting across huge political spaces. Public crew listings credit Peter Moseman and Ty Arnold as cinematographers, with Arnold specifically listed in some credits for second unit photography, which makes sense for a film that needs both dramatic close work and large-scale action coverage. The strongest visual instinct is scale. Because the film was shot in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, the camera has access to landscapes that already carry historical weight. Steppes, mountains, hard sunlight, earth tones stretching into distance. The wide shots are not just there to impress us. They remind us that Timur's ambition is geographical before it becomes imperial. He is not trying to win one throne in one room. He is trying to master distance itself. The camera understands that, often placing riders and camps against enormous horizons, so human power looks both bold and fragile. That contrast between small bodies and immense terrain gives the film its best visual poetry. A commander on horseback can look heroic in a tight frame. Pull the camera back, and he becomes a speck challenging a continent. That is the tension Timur lives inside. The cinematography keeps returning to that idea. Human will against physical vastness. It is not subtle, but it is effective. Historical epics need images that speak before dialogue arrives, and these compositions do exactly that. They turn ambition into a shape on the horizon. The battle photography leans toward clarity more than chaos, which is a good choice for this kind of film. Modern action editing often chops combat into fragments until geography disappears. Here, the better sequences try to preserve direction. Where riders are moving, where danger is coming from, where the balance of force begins to shift. That matters because Timur's identity is strategic. If the camera reduced every fight to mud, yelling, and metal, we would lose the character's tactical intelligence. The action has to feel brutal, yes, but also readable. War is violence. For Timur, war is also calculation. Second unit cinematography becomes especially important in those moments. Large-scale riding, movement across terrain, battle inserts, impacts, charges, these are the pieces that make an epic breathe. When they work, they give the film kinetic muscle without forcing the main dramatic unit to carry every physical detail. The result is a visual rhythm that alternates between command and consequence. Timur observing, riders moving, steel meeting flesh, dust swallowing the aftermath. It is not always seamless, but the intention is clear. The movie wants action to feel like an extension of politics. Lighting is one of the film's more grounded choices. The outdoor scenes often benefit from hard natural light, which gives faces and armor a rough, unsentimental texture. No one looks too clean. No one looks protected by glamour. In a world defined by weather, distance, and violence, soft beauty would feel dishonest. The harshness works. It carves the actors into the landscape rather than separating them from it. When Timur stands under open sky, the light does not flatter him. It tests him. Interior scenes operate differently. Tents, council spaces, and enclosed political settings rely more on shadow, firelight, and controlled pools of illumination. That visual shift matters because the danger changes. Outside, threats come from terrain, armies, and exposure. Inside, threats come from words, glances, and withheld loyalty. The camera often tightens in these scenes, letting faces become battlegrounds. A look across a war council can feel as decisive as a cavalry charge because the framing tells us where power is gathering. The film's color work supports that divide. Exterior sequences live in dust, sand, muted bronze, and blue-gray distance. Interior politics lean warmer but darker, with fire and fabric creating pockets of intimacy that never quite feel safe. This palette keeps the film from slipping into glossy fantasy. It looks weathered. That is crucial. Timur's world should not feel like a legend already polished by time. It should feel like the raw material from which legend will later be carved. Camera movement is used with restraint. The film does not float constantly or shake itself into urgency. It often prefers controlled tracking, lateral movement, and patient framing, especially in scenes where Timur is reading a room. That restraint aligns with Christian Mortensen's performance. His Timur is not all explosion. He is containment. So the camera often behaves the same way, holding, waiting, allowing pressure to build before movement breaks the stillness. When the frame finally loosens during battle or pursuit, the shift has more force because the film has not been visually shouting the whole time. Composition also does quiet character work. Timur is frequently framed with open space behind or beside him, suggesting both possibility and isolation. Hussayn's frames tend to feel more structured, more socially enclosed, often tied to rank and proximity. Aljai's framing, at its best, captures her position between private emotion and public consequence. These are not accidental effects. In a historical drama where dialogue can sometimes carry too much exposition, framing becomes a relief. It lets us feel hierarchy without having it explained. The visual effects, when present, appear designed to support scale rather than dominate it. That is the correct hierarchy. Nothing kills historical texture faster than digital spectacle that looks weightless. Rise of the Conqueror is strongest when practical landscapes, physical costumes, real horses, and tangible environments carry the image, with digital enhancement staying in the background. The audience may not consciously separate those elements, but they feel the difference. Real dust behaves differently. Real distance has depth. Real bodies under real weather carry fatigue in a way computers still struggle to fake. The weakness is that the film sometimes reaches for grandeur without quite achieving visual transcendence. There are images that are strong, composed, and handsome, but not always unforgettable. A truly great historical epic gives you frames that burn into memory. A silhouette, a massacre, a coronation, a face in firelight that tells you history has shifted. Rise of the Conqueror gets close in several landscape and council sequences, but it does not consistently push its imagery into iconic territory. It is visually credible more often than visually devastating. Even so, the cinematography gives the movie a sturdy cinematic identity. It understands the relationship between land and power, between distance and ambition, between stillness and violence. Moseman and Arnold's credited work supports Jacob Schwartz's larger goal: make Timur's rise feel physically grounded before it becomes mythic. The camera keeps dragging the legend back to earth. Dust under hooves, shadow across faces, mountains watching men destroy each other for control of the road, and that is exactly what this story needs. The visuals do not merely show where Timur lives, they show what he is trying to conquer: space, fear, loyalty, the future. But cinema is never only what the eye receives. The next layer is what the ear feels first: music, throat-deep textures, war drums, silence, and the soundscape that turns historical violence into emotional pressure. I'll continue into the music and sound design segment. I'll keep it focused on what can be supported or observed, especially because detailed soundtrack documentation is limited. Thought for Six's sound in Rise of the Conqueror has a heavier burden than the visuals, because the image already gives us scale. Mountains, horsemen, tents, armor, dust, those elements instantly announce historical epic. But sound has to do something more private. It has to tell us what that world feels like from inside the body. Composer Jonathan Keith provides the original score, and soundtrack reporting confirms that Plaza Mayer Company released the album for Tamerlane. Rise of the Last Conqueror on April 10, 2026, just ahead of the film's North American digital release window. Keith's score works best when it treats Central Asia not as exotic wallpaper, but as a pressure system. The music does not merely decorate the Silk Road setting. It tries to translate movement, distance, and threat into sound. The official soundtrack materials connect the score to Timur's emotional arc, and to late medieval Central Asian culture, with Keith describing the work as an attempt to shape character emotion while immersing himself in that historical world. That matters because this kind of film can easily fall into generic, epic music, pounding drums, male choir, swelling strings, repeat until battle. Keith reaches for something more specific. The most distinctive musical idea is the karne, the long ceremonial trumpet associated with Central Asian musical tradition. In the soundtrack press material, Keith describes the karne as becoming a musical symbol for Ilyas and his army, tied to the tension around the Silk Road and the struggle between ambition, power, and protection. That is smart scoring. A character or faction should not only look different, they should sound different. The moment a particular tone enters the mix, the audience begins to feel political presence before anyone explains it. And the karne is perfect for this world. It does not sound polite, it cuts, it announces, it feels ceremonial and threatening at the same time, which fits a story where public display and military intimidation often share the same language. When a brass-like call stretches across a scene, it can feel like a warning traveling over distance, not just music, territory speaking. That is where the score finds its most memorable identity. Sound as power projected outward, a sonic banner planted before the army arrives. Keith also uses orchestral writing to give the film emotional shape. Strings and low percussion help bridge the distance between intimate betrayal and battlefield consequence. That is crucial because Rise of the Conqueror is not only about armies colliding, it is about loyalties decaying. A score that only roars would flatten that. The better cues seem to understand restraint, letting tension creep rather than explode too early. Quiet notes under a council scene can do more damage than full drums, because they tell us the room is already bleeding before anyone draws a blade. The sound design follows a similar philosophy when it leans into texture. Hooves do not simply thunder, they carry rhythm. Armor does not simply clank. It marks rank, readiness, and fear. Wind across open land becomes part of the psychological environment. Silence matters too. In historical action cinema, silence is often treated as dead space between spectacle. Here it becomes anticipation, the pause before a command, the breath before a charge, the awful emptiness after violence has passed and the world has to keep existing. That use of silence is especially important for Timur. Christian Mortensen's performance is built around containment, and the audio landscape supports that. When Timur studies a room, the sound often seems to narrow with him. Background noise softens. The air tightens. You begin listening the way he listens, scanning for weakness in tone, hesitation, and breath. That is good sound storytelling because it places the audience inside strategic attention. We are not just watching a commander think. We are hearing the world become information. Battle sound is more uneven but often effective. The strongest combat moments avoid turning everything into one muddy wall of noise. You hear layers, horses, shouts, metal impact, arrows, bodies, drums, open air. That layering gives action geography. It tells us whether danger is near, approaching, surrounding, or already too late. Sound designer and re-recording mixer T.J. Jacques is credited in public crew listings, along with other sound department contributors, such as dialogue editor Michael Huang. Their work matters because clarity in battle is not an accident. It is built track by track. The film's dialogue mix also carries a lot of responsibility. Historical dramas can become heavy with names, titles, factions, and political exposition, so voices need presence without sounding artificially clean. The best scenes find that balance. Speech sits clearly enough to follow, but still feels embedded in tents, fields, halls, and weather. You sense space around the words. That helps keep the film from feeling like modern actors reciting historical information into studio microphones. The world breathes around them, and that makes the dialogue feel less staged. Where the audio occasionally struggles is in its reach for grandeur. Some cues lean into familiar epic patterns: slow build, percussion swell, heroic or ominous orchestral lift. Those choices work, but they are less distinctive than the culturally rooted textures and factional motifs. The film is at its most alive when it lets regional sound color and political identity shape the music. It is less alive when it sounds like it could belong to any streaming-era medieval war film. Specificity is the difference between atmosphere and memory. Still, the score's release as a dedicated 17-track album suggests a serious attempt to give the film a coherent musical identity beyond background accompaniment. Spotify lists the original motion picture soundtrack under Jonathan Keith with 17 songs, reinforcing that the music was designed as a structured listening experience, not just scattered cues attached to scenes. That matters for a film like this because themes need recurrence. A rise to power story depends on musical evolution. Motifs should harden, darken, or expand as the protagonist changes. The audio landscape ultimately gives Rise of the Conqueror much of its emotional weather. The visuals show conquest as distance and dust. The sound makes it internal: breath, metal, horn, hoofbeat, drum, silence. Keith's score is strongest when it resists generic epic thunder and lets the world's own musical vocabulary speak. The sound design is strongest when it treats violence not as volume, but as consequence. You hear power before you see it. You hear fear before someone names it. And in a film about a man becoming legend, that matters. Because legends are not built only from images. They are built from sounds people remember. The horn before the army, the hush before betrayal, the rhythm of hooves arriving too late to stop. Rise of the Conqueror understands that enough to give its sonic world weight, even when it sometimes falls back on familiar epic grammar. And once image and sound have done their work, the next question becomes what happened behind the curtain: the production journey, the locations, the physical challenges, and the human effort required to put this conquest on screen. The production journey behind Rise of the Conqueror feels almost inseparable from the movie's identity. Some films can fake their world from a soundstage and survive. This one could not. A story about Timur, the Silk Road, fractured Khanates, moving armies, and Central Asian power has to feel physically anchored, or the whole thing collapses into costume pageant cinema. Public materials repeatedly emphasize that the film was shot across Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, with IMDb listing Khiva, Uzbekistan, and Almaty, Kazakhstan, among the filming locations. That commitment to location shooting matters because the landscape does not behave like a backdrop. It pushes back. Open ground changes how bodies move. Harsh sunlight changes how faces read. Dust changes the texture of every costume, every horse charge, every pause between lines. Gazeta uses behind-the-scenes reporting, describes the production as defined by a commitment to shooting entirely on location across Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, which explains why the film's world often feels more tactile than polished. You can sense the production choosing inconvenience in exchange for credibility. Good trade. A historical action film also becomes a logistics machine very quickly. Horses, armor, large costumes, extras, regional terrain, weapons, dust, weather, movement between locations — none of that is casual filmmaking. Even without a flood of detailed production diaries, the finished film tells you what the crew had to manage. Riders need space. Costumes need continuity after repeated takes. Battle sequences need safety coordination. Period props need to survive outdoor environments. The romantic idea is epic scale. The practical reality is scheduling, transportation, heat, fatigue, and 1,000 tiny problems that can ruin a shot before the camera even rolls. What makes this production especially interesting is its cross-cultural positioning. The film was produced by Mystery Box, released in North America by Well Go USA, and sold internationally under the title Tamerlane, Rise of the Last Conqueror. That means the movie had to speak to more than one audience at once. It needed enough historical specificity to feel rooted in Central Asia, but enough direct genre propulsion to travel globally as an action-adventure drama. That is a difficult balance. Too local, and distributors worry about marketability. Too generic, and the story loses the very reason it exists. Jacob Schwartz's involvement goes back before the 2026 release cycle. A 2022 Dario report covered his intention to make a film about Emir Timur, and quoted him discussing the goal of making Timur's story interesting for Western audiences. That early framing is revealing. Schwartz was not merely chasing a battle movie. He was trying to translate a regionally monumental figure into a form accessible to viewers who may know little about Central Asian history. Translation is not simplification when done well. It is selection. What do you foreground? What do you explain? What do you trust the image to carry? The film's production also reflects the modern reality of independent historical spectacle. This is not a Marvel-sized machine with unlimited resources and years of brand familiarity doing half the marketing work. It is a period action epic asking viewers to invest in a historical figure who remains relatively unfamiliar to many English-speaking audiences. Screen Daily reported in May 2025 that Capture launched international sales on the film, and Schwartz described Tamerlane as a man who forged an empire and left a legacy still felt centuries later. That line captures the whole production gamble. Sell not just a movie, but a historical imagination. And here is where the behind-the-scenes challenge becomes creative rather than merely logistical. When you shoot a story like this in real locations, the environment starts influencing the performance. Actors do not have to imagine every hardship. They are standing in wind, heat, dust, uneven terrain. Costumes have weight, horses have temperament. Sunlight does not wait for emotional continuity. That physical pressure can make scenes feel less controlled, but also more alive. You can feel that in the movie's best outdoor passages, where the frame has a roughness that studio perfection would have sanded away. The action staging likely demanded the most careful coordination. Cavalry movement is one of the hardest things to make convincing because speed, safety, and clarity constantly fight each other. Go too slow and the charge loses danger. Go too close and the geography disappears. Go too wide and the human stakes shrink. The film's battle scenes work best when they preserve directional logic. Who is advancing? Who is trapped? Who has the advantage? That kind of clarity usually comes from planning, rehearsals, second unit coverage, and editing discipline. It is invisible labor when done well. You only notice it when it fails. The production's use of a global cast also shaped the behind-the-scenes dynamic. Public listings place Christian Mortensen, Mahesh Jadoo, Yulduz Rajabova, Joshua Joe, and a broad ensemble of regional and international performers at the center of the film. That mix can enrich a historical epic, but it also creates challenges of performance style, accent, language rhythm, and tonal consistency. Everyone has to feel like they belong in the same world, even if they arrive from different acting traditions. The film is strongest when that diversity creates texture rather than fragmentation. There is also the question of historical responsibility. Timur is not a neutral figure. He is admired, feared, mythologized, and condemned depending on who is telling the story. A production like this has to decide how much of the brutality to show, how much of the state-building to emphasize, and how much psychological ambiguity the audience can carry. That is not just a writing problem. It is a production problem. Costumes, music, framing, casting, and marketing all participate in shaping whether Timur feels like hero, anti-hero, conqueror, savior, or warning. The movie walks that line carefully, though not always evenly. What the production journey ultimately gives Rise of the Conqueror is a sense of earned physicality. The movie may have limitations. Some spaces feel more fully realized than others. Some crowd scenes and factional moments suggest the tension between epic ambition and available resources. But the decision to ground the production in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan gives the film a foundation it could not have faked. The locations do not merely authenticate the image. They give the story resistance. That resistance is the whole point. Timur's rise should feel difficult. The film's making seems to have mirrored that difficulty in its own way. A cross-border historical epic built around location shooting, international sales, physical action, and a subject rarely centered in mainstream English-language cinema. The behind-the-scenes story is not one of chaos or scandal, at least not from publicly available reporting. It is something more useful. A portrait of ambition meeting terrain. And once that ambition reached audiences, the next question became colder and more measurable. How did the film perform commercially? And what did its release strategy reveal about the market for historical epics today? The commercial story of Rise of the Conqueror is not a triumphant box office march. It is something more revealing, a modern historical epic trying to survive in a marketplace that no longer automatically rewards scale, costumes, horses, and sincere ambition. The film reportedly carried an estimated $30 million budget, while Box Office Mojo lists its worldwide theatrical gross at $171,444. IMDb reports the same estimated budget and worldwide gross figure. Those numbers are harsh, not soft-opening harsh. More like a warning flare for anyone trying to launch a non-franchise historical action film in 2026. The release strategy explains part of that picture. In North America, Well Go USA set Rise of the Conqueror for a digital release on April 14, 2026, rather than positioning it as a wide theatrical event. Variety reported the acquisition and digital date in January 2026, framing the film as a historical action epic sold to Well Go USA for the North American market. That matters because domestic theatrical grosses were never the main commercial battlefield here. The film was not trying to compete in thousands of American cinemas against superhero sequels, horror openings, and animated brands. It was built for a hybrid international and home viewing life. Internationally, the theatrical footprint was narrow and regionally targeted. Box Office Mojo lists a Russia CIS opening of $54,871 and a total of $115,331 in that market, while the Turkey release opened to 30,928 tunners across 143 theaters and grossed $56,113. Add those pieces together, and you understand the film's theatrical ceiling very quickly. This was not a breakout theatrical run. It was more of a limited territorial release pattern attached to a digital-first commercial plan, with cinemas functioning as visibility and regional legitimacy rather than the engine of profitability. That difference matters because raw box office totals can mislead when a film's distribution is not theatrical first. $171,444 worldwide gross against a reported $30 million budget looks catastrophic if judged like a traditional wide-release studio movie. But Rise of the Conqueror was not released like that. It moved through international sales, territorial distribution, digital rental and purchase platforms, and later physical media. Screen Anarchy reported that the movie would debut digitally on April 14, 2026, with Blu-ray and DVD editions following on June 30, 2026. The box office number is real, but it is not the whole business model. Still, let's not soften the obvious. For a film with epic scale, international locations, battle sequences, and a reported 8-figure budget, the theatrical return is tiny. Even allowing for digital revenue, licensing, physical media, and international presales, theatrical visibility matters. It creates conversation. It gives a film cultural weight. It makes the audience feel an event is happening. Rise of the Conqueror entered the market quietly, and quiet is deadly for historical spectacle. A movie about Timur should feel like an army arriving. Commercially, it arrived more like a dispatch. The challenge is partly genre-related. Historical epics now live in a strange commercial space. Audiences still respond to scale, but usually when scale is attached to familiar intellectual property, major stars, prestige awards momentum, or a director with event status. Gladiator could become a phenomenon in 2000 because adult-oriented theatrical spectacle still had a central place in the market. In 2026, that lane is narrower. A film about Timur, starring actors without massive global box office draw, released mainly through digital channels, faces a much harder climb. The subject is fascinating. Fascinating does not automatically sell tickets. The film's title strategy also reveals the commercial balancing act. Internationally, Tamerlane, Rise of the Last Conqueror carries historical specificity and grandeur. In North America, Rise of the Conqueror is shorter, more genre-friendly, and easier to market to action audiences. Public listings confirm that Well Go USA used the shorter title for North America, while the international sales title retained the Tamerlane framing. That is not just branding trivia. It shows the distributors trying to answer a basic question. Do audiences respond more to the name of the historical figure or to the promise of conquest? The answer, commercially, seems mixed at best. The title Rise of the Conqueror communicates genre instantly, but it also becomes more generic. Tamerlane has specificity, cultural weight, and historical curiosity. Rise of the Conqueror sounds like a dozen streaming thumbnails fighting for attention. That may help casual digital browsing, but it can also blur identity. In a crowded market, specificity can be a weapon. The film's best selling point was not merely that it was about a conqueror. It was that it was about this conqueror, from this region, in this historical moment rarely centered in English-language cinema. The reported $30 million budget also raises an important question about expectation. For Hollywood blockbusters, $30 million is modest. For an independent historical action epic, it is serious money. Every dollar has to appear on screen, and for the most part, the film does look more expensive than its limited theatrical gross would suggest. Location shooting in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, period costumes, horses, action coverage, and an international ensemble all give the production visible ambition. But box office does not reward effort. It rewards awareness, timing, distribution muscle, audience hunger, and sometimes luck. The commercial impact, then, is less about profit headlines and more about market lesson. Rise of the Conqueror proves there is still creative interest in historical stories outside the usual Western canon. But it also shows how difficult it is to convert that interest into theatrical revenue without a major platform push. The film may find more of its audience through digital rentals, streaming availability, Blu-ray collectors, regional viewers, and history-curious action fans than it ever did in cinemas. That is not failure in artistic terms, but commercially, it changes the definition of success. What makes the numbers sting is that the movie's core appeal is cinematic. Landscapes, battles, horses, sound, dust, armor. These are big screen pleasures. Yet the business path pushed the film toward home viewing almost immediately. That contradiction defines many mid-budget genre films now. They are made with theatrical instincts and distributed through digital reality. The result is a strange half-life. Visually ambitious films experienced on televisions, tablets, and phones where scale has to fight the size of the screen. So the box office performance of Rise of the Conqueror is modest to the point of severe, but the commercial story is more nuanced than a simple flop label. The theatrical gross was minimal. The release was strategically digital. The budget was ambitious for the distribution footprint. The title was adapted for different markets. And the film's long-term value will likely depend less on opening weekend and more on library life, streaming deals, international licensing, physical media, and whether viewers hungry for underexplored historical epics discover it over time. Numbers tell stories too. Here, they tell the story of a film whose creative ambition outgrew its theatrical reach. Rise of the Conqueror wanted to resurrect the historical epic through Central Asian history, but the marketplace treated it like niche action content. That tension is painful but revealing. And once the money has spoken, the next voice belongs to critics and audiences. The reviews, reactions, disagreements, and cultural response that determine whether the film becomes forgotten product or slowly earns a second life. Critical reception for Rise of the Conqueror has been narrow, which already tells part of the story. This was not a film that arrived with a thunderstorm of major newspaper reviews, festival debates, awards predictions, and think-piece warfare. Its response has been smaller, more scattered, and more revealing because of that. Rotten Tomatoes currently lists only one critic review for the film, while the popcorn meter remains unavailable because it has fewer than 50 verified audience ratings. That is not a verdict on quality by itself. It is a sign of limited visibility. The most prominent mainstream review came from Phil Hode in The Guardian, who gave the film 3 out of 5 stars. His take is useful because it captures the divided feeling many viewers may have: admiration for the ambition, skepticism toward the execution. He frames the film as a kind of gladiator-style historical epic, filtered through Central Asian elements, praising some of the visual and cultural freshness while criticizing the script and lead performance for lacking the force the subject demands. That is the central reception problem in one sentence. The world fascinates, but the drama does not always conquer. And honestly, that criticism lands because Rise of the Conqueror is trying to do something bigger than its storytelling sometimes supports. A film about Timur cannot merely be competent. It needs danger in the walls. It needs the sense that history is being bent by a personality too large to contain. When critics say Mortensen feels too relaxed or the script too flat, they are really saying the same thing. The movie's subject has volcanic potential, but the film does not always erupt. It glows. It smokes. It threatens. Then, too often, it chooses order over madness. Audience response, where available, has been warmer than the limited critic response. Rotten Tomatoes user comments praise the film's locations, practical-feeling battle scenes, costumes, and the appeal of seeing a historical figure less familiar to Western viewers brought into an epic frame. Some viewers specifically argue that the movie deserved a theatrical release, which is an interesting reaction because it speaks less to narrative perfection and more to cinematic hunger. People are responding to the kind of movie this is, an original historical action drama with horses, landscapes, betrayal, strategy, and spectacle outside the usual franchise machine. That critic-audience divide is not huge in the statistical sense because the data pool is too small, but it is meaningful in tone. Critics seem more likely to notice the weaknesses in dialogue, character depth, and dramatic momentum. Viewers who enjoy historical epics may be more forgiving because the film offers something increasingly rare. Big landscapes, non-Western history, no superheroes, no multiverse homework, just political violence, mounted warfare, and a man trying to turn chaos into rule. For a certain audience, that alone carries real value. IMDb currently lists the film at 5.5 out of 10 from 467 ratings, which suggests a mixed but not dismissive audience response. That number feels about right for the movie's public reputation so far. Admired for ambition, questioned for execution, appreciated by niche viewers, unlikely to become a mainstream critical darling. A rating like that does not say disaster. It says uneven. It says some viewers found the epic they wanted, while others saw the seams. Genre outlets have been more receptive to the film's strengths. Film Combat Syndicate described it as a promising historical war, epic with caveats, pointing toward the action, intrigue, cast, and symbolic use of a recurring board game piece in Timur's development. That kind of response matters because action-focused critics often judge these films by a slightly different balance. Does it move? Does it build tension? Does the combat have impact? Does the world feel worth entering? On those terms, Rise of the Conqueror has a stronger case than it does as a psychological prestige biopic. Other niche reviews echo the same pattern. Budimate positions the film as appealing to viewers who enjoy large-scale historical epics, action, political intrigue, and character-driven drama, while also acknowledging that casting authenticity may be a sticking point for some audiences. That last point is important. A Central Asian epic led by an American actor was always going to invite scrutiny. Representation is not a decorative issue here. It affects how audiences experience legitimacy. The film wants to honor an underrepresented historical world, but its casting choices complicate that ambition for viewers sensitive to cultural specificity. The cultural response has therefore split along two lines. One line says, finally, a film is putting Timur and Central Asian history into a global action epic framework. The other says, yes, but whose gaze is shaping the story, and who gets to embody the central figure? Both reactions are valid. The first recognizes scarcity. The second recognizes power. When a region rarely receives mainstream cinematic attention, every major representation carries extra weight. Viewers are not only watching the movie, they are watching what kind of access the movie creates or withholds. Metacritic's page currently offers basic film details, but does not appear to show a developed critic score, which again reflects the limited scale of review coverage. That limited coverage may become part of the movie's long-term identity. Some films enter culture through explosion. Others drift in through recommendation. A history fan finds it, then an action fan, then someone interested in Timur, then someone curious about films shot in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. Rise of the Conqueror seems built for that second path. Slow discovery, not instant canonization. What the reception ultimately reveals is a film caught between two standards. As a rare Central Asian historical epic with real locations and large-scale ambition, it earns goodwill. As a dramatic portrait of one of history's most terrifying empire builders, it faces harsher scrutiny. The praise clusters around setting, spectacle, subject matter, and effort. The criticism clusters around script, emotional depth, charisma, and narrative force. That pattern is brutally clear. So culturally, Rise of the Conqueror may matter more as an attempt than as a triumph. That sounds like faint praise, but it is not. Attempts matter when they open doors. The The film proves there is cinematic appetite for stories beyond the usual European medieval kings and Roman generals. It also proves that representation through scale is not enough. The writing, casting, and psychological intensity have to rise to the same level as the landscapes. The response says, more films like this, but sharper, bolder, deeper. And that brings us to the final question. After the budget, the locations, the mixed reviews, the audience curiosity, and the uneven execution, what does Rise of the Conqueror actually leave behind? Not just as entertainment, but as a thematic statement about power, history, identity, and the terrible bargain of becoming legendary. The final measure of Rise of the Conqueror is not whether it turns Timur into a hero. That would be too simple, and frankly, too dishonest for a figure like this. The better question is whether the film understands the terror inside its own premise. Order can be beautiful from a distance and monstrous up close. The official synopsis frames Timur Barlas as a battle-scared ruler rising after the Mongol Empire's collapse to bring order to a fractured Central Asia, with the Silk Road's fate hanging in the balance. That is the movie's moral trap. Order sounds noble. The film keeps asking what order costs when one man decides he alone has the right to impose it. The central theme is loyalty under pressure. Timur begins inside a system of obligations: tribal loyalty, military duty, marriage ties, alliances, commands from rulers who claim legitimacy over him. But the film's drama comes from watching those obligations weaken one by one. Loyalty in this world is not sacred. It is tested by hunger, distance, ambition, insult, fear, and the practical question every soldier eventually asks: who can actually keep us alive? That is where Timur becomes dangerous. He does not reject loyalty because he is faithless. He outgrows it because power teaches him loyalty is only useful when it serves survival. That is the darkest thing the movie understands. Timur's rise is not built on one great betrayal. It is built on a series of permissions he gives himself. First, he compromises because the situation demands it. Then he repeats the compromise because it worked. Then he calls the compromise wisdom. That is how men become legends and monsters at the same time. Not through sudden transformation, through repetition, through success, through the addictive proof that the terrible thing you did yesterday made you stronger today. The Silk Road setting gives that theme a wider historical charge. This is not conquest for empty land. It is conquest for movement. Trade routes, information, wealth, military passage, cultural exchange, taxation, survival. The film's own public materials emphasize the fractured 14th century Central Asian world and its connection to the Silk Road, which gives Timur's ambition economic and civilizational stakes beyond personal glory. A lesser film would treat roads as geography. Rise of the Conqueror treats them as power. Whoever controls the road controls who eats, who travels, who prospers, who disappears. Family is the second major theme, and it is the one the film could have pushed even harder. Aljai's position as Timur's wife and Hussayn's sister gives the story a built-in emotional wound. She is not just married into conflict, she embodies it. Every political shift threatens to become personal damage. This is where the movie finds its most human texture, because empire stories often hide behind maps. Maps do not cry. Maps do not remember childhood. Maps do not lie awake beside someone becoming unrecognizable. Through Aljai, the film reminds us that conquest always enters the home before it enters history. Hussayn's role sharpens the film's argument about legitimacy. He represents inherited authority, while Timur represents earned force. The movie does not make that conflict as complex as it could have, but the idea is strong. Bloodline versus ability, rank versus result. A world falling apart cannot survive on titles alone, but a world ruled only by force becomes a graveyard with better organization. That is the contradiction Timur never fully solves. He exposes the weakness of the old order, then replaces it with something more efficient and more terrifying. As a legacy piece, the film matters most because of what it chooses to center. English-language historical epics have returned again and again to Rome, medieval Europe, British monarchy, Greek myth, and Western war memory. Rise of the Conqueror turns toward Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, the post-Mongol world, and Timur subjects far less familiar to many mainstream Western viewers. The film was shot in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, And that location work gives its legacy an authenticity of place, even when the drama becomes conventional. The images matter. The setting matters. Representation through geography may not be enough, but it is not nothing. Still, the film's legacy is complicated by its execution. Critics have already pointed toward the gap between ambition and dramatic force. The Guardian praised the freshness of the Central Asian historical focus, while criticizing the film's storytelling and lead performance as too muted for a figure of Timur's magnitude. That criticism gets close to the truth. Rise of the Conqueror has scale, but not always danger. It has visual credibility, but not always psychological electricity. It wants to show the birth of a conqueror, yet sometimes hesitates before the full horror of that birth. That hesitation weakens the final impact. Timur should feel like a man whose rise solves one crisis by creating a larger one. The film reaches for that, especially in its better scenes of betrayal, silence, and strategic violence, but it sometimes settles for familiar epic grammar, destiny language, solemn speeches, montages of hardship, rivals positioned neatly as obstacles. The result is a movie that is stronger as a historical action gateway than as a definitive character study. It may introduce viewers to Timur's cinematic potential more than it fully realizes that potential itself. And yet, I do not dismiss it. Not at all. There is value in an imperfect film that opens a door. Genre outlets have responded to the movie as a promising historical war, epic shaped by loyalty, betrayal, and redemption, and that feels like the fairest lane for it. This is not a masterpiece hiding in plain sight. It is not the Gladiator of Central Asian history. But it is also not disposable content. It has ambition in its bones. It has landscapes that deserve a bigger screen. It has a subject powerful enough to haunt a better, harsher film one day. The final verdict. Rise of the Conqueror is a visually grounded, culturally intriguing, dramatically uneven historical epic. Its greatest strength is its world. The steppes, the political fracture, the Silk Road tension, the sense that empire is born from logistics as much as destiny. Its greatest weakness is that Timur himself never becomes as frightening, charismatic, or morally overwhelming as the film needs him to be. Christian Mortensen gives the character discipline and inwardness, but the role demands a force that can bend the air around him. Sometimes you feel the conqueror coming, sometimes you only see the costume of one. For viewers who love historical warfare, underexplored settings, political rivalry, and non-franchise spectacle, the film is worth watching. For viewers seeking a psychologically devastating portrait of empire building, it may feel too restrained. But as a cinematic attempt to bring Timur into a global action epic frame, it deserves attention. It asks a question that history never stops asking. When chaos destroys a region, do we celebrate the man who restores order, or fear the kind of order only he can create? That question is the film's real legacy. Not the battles, not the armor, not even the rise. The legacy is the discomfort of watching ambition dress itself as necessity. Timur does not simply conquer land. He conquers the moral language around violence, and by the end, that may be the most frightening conquest of all.